Hi everybody, this is Katje. I welcome you to my video channel this evening. I wanted to first play that great song by Blondie called Sunday Girl, which I haven't heard in a while, so I wanted to share that with you. It's a great song from the early New Wave era. The other thing I'd like to do tonight is begin telling a story. This story has 3 parts, so the name of the story appropriately is Trio. So in this video session, and hopefully in the next 2, I will tell this story, which came to me recently, and I hope that you will enjoy it. So once upon a time, there was a young woman named Mina. And Mina had lived away from home for a long time. She had not been back to her home for a while, but where she grew up, in the town where she had grown up, she had a fraternal twin whose name was Michael, whom she had not seen in many, many years. For whatever reason, they had drifted apart and had not kept in touch. So she hadn't seen Michael for at least 10 years or so. And eventually she began to wonder how he was doing and wanted to contact him and find out what had happened, what had changed in his life. But when she called the last number that she had for him, which was his house outside of the town where they had grown up out in the mountains, she couldn't get an answer. She began to worry. She called several times over the course of a week or so and never got any answer. So she decided that she had better go to find out what's going on. She was concerned that maybe something had happened to him. She went back to the town where she grew up and she asked around in the town about Michael, her fraternal twin, but nobody seemed to know anything about him or what had happened to him. Some people didn't even really know who that was. Maybe they'd heard something about a person like this many years ago, but they hadn't seen or heard anything about him in quite some time. So now Mina was very alarmed. So she took these groceries that she bought and went out to her brother's house out in the mountains, not too far from town, to see what was going on. This was a rather small, a modest dwelling. It was a little bit larger than a cabin, but it was out somewhat, maybe about 5 or 10, 15 miles outside of town. So when she got there, it was basically abandoned. Nobody was there. It looked like nobody had lived there for quite some time. So at this point, Mina became very concerned. She was really confused and didn't know what had happened to her fraternal twin, her twin brother. But fortunately, she still had a key to this house from many, many years ago. So she unlocked the door, she went inside. Once again, there was no indication that anybody had lived there for some time. All the furniture was covered with sheets and they were layered with dust. So there was no indication that Michael had, or anybody else had been in this dwelling for some time. Now, while Mina was at the house, she could smell wood smoke and wondered where that was coming from. So she went back outside, followed the odor of the wood smoke, then there was a trail that led into the woods, so she began to follow this trail because that's where the smoke seemed to be coming from. And maybe after about a quarter mile or so, not too far from her brother's house, she came upon this very, very small dwelling. It was a hut, and it had a chimney that was blowing smoke. It almost seemed like a dwelling that was too small for anybody to live in, and yet, sure enough, somebody seemed to be living there. So Mina went up to the front door, and she knocked on the front door, and this very, very old woman came to the front door and answered it. She was so old, she looked like she was well into her 90s, and yet she was very spry, and she was apparently living in this hut that was strangely, from the outside at least, seemed too small for anybody to be living in, but there she was. So Mina introduced herself, and the old woman told her that her name was Hannah, and Mina very quickly began to inquire after her brother named Michael. The old woman didn't really say anything. She listened to what Mina had to say. She listened to this story about how Mina had tried to contact her brother over the last few weeks to no avail. Then she had come here and found the house completely abandoned, apparently, even though it was locked up, and nobody had been there for some time. So the old woman, Hannah, listened to this for some time, and then she said to Mina, well, this is what you're going to need to do in order to find out what happened to Michael. What you need to do is stay in this house, his house where he used to live. You need to stay in this house for the next 3 nights. And no matter what happens, there may be some very strange things that happen in the course of these 3 nights. Do not go outside at any point, no matter what you hear, and do not let anybody else from the outside into the house, no matter what happens, no matter what you hear, especially in the middle of the night. You need to stay in this house, because in order to find out what happened to Michael, the truth will come from within the house. It won't come from anything outside. So, understandably, Mina was a little troubled about this, but she took it to heart and went back to the house, unpacked all the groceries, cleaned off the furniture, removed the blankets, or the sheets, I should say, from the furniture, cleaned things up as well as she could, and made some supper, and fairly soon after that, nightfall came, and she decided to go to bed. Now here's where the story begins to get even more interesting. In the middle of the night, Mina was sleeping in the house on a cot that she found, and in the middle of the night, the way the house was situated, it was located at the end of a long valley. So at one end of the valley was the city limit of the town where Mina and her brother had grown up, and then there was this long valley with a lot of trees and sort of becoming increasingly rural, and also approaching the mountains. And then at the foot of the mountain was this hut, at her brother's house at the end of this long valley. So Mina was in there, and in the middle of the night, it was around midnight, she heard at the far end of the valley, near the town, what sounded like a train, a train whistle, this very loud noise. It was a kind of a shrieking noise, very loud, howling like a train whistle. And it got closer and closer, so it sounded to her, and she realized that she wasn't dreaming at that point, it sounded to her like a train was headed, a giant locomotive was headed straight for the house. Her first instinct was to jump off of the cot and put on some clothes and run out to escape this oncoming train that she was almost sure was going to plow right into her brother's house and destroy it. But at the last minute, just before she was about to jump out of bed and get dressed and run out the door, she remembered what the old woman Hannah had said to her. And that is, do not, no matter what happens outside, do not go outside and do not let anything from the outside come in. But no matter what you hear, you need to stay inside this dwelling where your brother lived, because only there are you going to find out what happened to him. So at the very last minute, right before the train apparently was going to hit the house with Mina in it, the noise stopped and there was complete silence, and it was as if nothing had happened at all. So Mina realized that it was very important for her to heed the old woman Hannah's advice. That's what she did. So that was the first night. And that's the end of the story, the first part of the story. Next time, we'll see what happened on the second night, and then later we will see what happened on the third night when the story is resolved. So until then, this is Katje. Thank you for joining me this evening. I hope everybody has a nice run up to Thanksgiving. Soon Thanksgiving will be here, so I hope that you have the opportunity to spend that holiday with your family, your friends, and your loved ones. But I hope to speak to you again before then and share the rest of my story with you. Until that time, this is Katje Eckhart saying good night and wishing everybody a very restful and good evening.